Hello, and welcome to another season of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are diving deep into the world of Memetic. And This is a strange one. We've never quite done anything like this. Last winter, listeners may recall, then again, you're probably not listening chronologically as we've experienced, but we put together kind of our own spiritual duology of Mark Russell work. And here, James Tynion's done it for us by saying out loud, like, this is a non-connected trilogy. It's a spiritual trilogy.
It's a thematic trilogy. Yeah, and then it was as we talked about last week. It was conceived, well, maybe not conceived that way, but he talks about how these three stories came to him kind of at once. These three different paths of the end of the world, and so as he was working with Eric Donovan, I'm sure as they went along, they talked about it like a spiritual trilogy. So, from maybe not from initial conception, but definitely once into actual creation and storytelling, I'm sure they were informing in and back on each other as they were working through, getting these published and getting them out. So, and we'll see as we go along. Obviously, we're not going to talk about it in this episode here. We'll focus on the first book, Memetic, but as we go through, we'll see how the books are or aren't in conversation with, and something we'll discuss, and that the idea that if you read them in real time, how reading Memetic first, then Cognetic, then Eugenic would maybe not affect your reading of the stories, but again, how they inform each other. Given that that's how they were presented to the world in that way. So if you're reading them real time, that's how you would have experienced these stories. So they are in conversation with each other. And I think it's a neat idea, the idea of here's one global galaxy brain take. And we're going to explore that in three different ways, three completely different aspects, three different avenues, to kind of explore and examine those kind of different parts of the human psyche, which I think ultimately what these books, if you boil them down, the root of all of them comes from one aspect of humanity.
Yeah. And if you read the letter in the back, you see that they were clearly in conversation with each other. Eric Donovan doesn't have a writing credit, but he is clearly influencing the story and the thought process, even though these all came to James Tynion.
Well, the initial idea it is, but I mean, in terms of story creation, I mean, the credited creators of the story are Tynion and Donovan.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So,
he just didn't script it, but he did contribute to the conception and story.
That's how comics are made. The idea of the actual script goes to the writer, but story creation, character creation, all that's collaborative.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the team to some extent, how much give and take there is, but yeah. I would assume there's always some degree of it. And, doing a study like this really makes me, one, want to just keep doing Mark Russell books because there's so many and they're great. And two, I have always liked doing the sleuthing work of, say, and I may have used this example before, but reading the work of a duo like Lemire Sorrentino, where it's, you go read New 52, Green Arrow 17 to 34, which is what they had. And then they move over to Marvel and they do Old Man Logan for 12 issues there. And then they splinter off and they go do Gideon Falls. And you can go in cold and read Gideon Falls. Clearly, those are all disconnected because one's DC, one's Marvel, one's Image. But the budding relationship between the two of them, they clearly had something they were kind of vibing on and just wanted to take it to the next level. This is that, but with so much more intentionality.
Yeah. Like I have to imagine when they first got together, like they did a short story together for an anthology, which came out. I don't know when it was actually produced when they worked on it, but it was published right before Memetic came out. So they had some sort of relationship working together. But yeah, they're absolutely, I think intentionality is the right word. The idea of we want to tackle these three stories together versus something like, you mentioned Lemire and Sorrentino. I think about someone, a pair like Tom King and Mitch Gerrits. that
Yeah.
they get
Oh
thrown
my
together on a
gosh.
book.
Yeah.
They get thrown together on a book on Sheriff of Babylon, pretty much because it was a military type book, and Mitch Gerads at the time was known for drawing guns. He was the guy that drew military stuff, and so it fit that story that Tom King had written. And the word you used was that they vibed, and they did. Like they clicked, and they wanted to keep working together, and then they can work together in superhero realms and other realms. They want to keep working together because they have there's clearly a similar vision to the types of stories they want to tell. But again, that works that progresses from work to work to work, right? We're going to do this thing. Oh, hey, then we'll do the next thing together and the next thing together and things like that. Versus what I think the situation we have here with Tynan and Donovan, you're right, is like the goal from the outset, like from the jump, is to tell all three of these stories. We want to tell all three of these stories together and put these out as if they were a connected trilogy. It's like it would be like approaching Boom and saying, hey, we have 9 issues. We have 3 story arcs that are all connected. We have 9 issues of that versus, hey, we have 3 oversized issues of 3 separate stories, which I'm sure is a lot harder pitch, to try and go in and have them
especially
connected.
where they started.
Yeah, but that was clearly their goal. They wanted to do that. And they wanted to tell these stories together. Because you're right, I think they have a similar approach and a similar view, kind of how with some of the gorier like horror elements. I mean, these are effectively horror stories. They don't shy away from
right.
So they're not traditional horror stories in terms.
Right, they're not hack slash. They're not.
Yeah. They're not jump
scare.
Yeah. But they're graphic. They don't shy away. So yeah, there is more of a psychological horror to it. The idea of especially in this book, when we talk about the technological horror of it, again, this falls a little more into the, I think you said Twilight Zone. I said Black Mirror is a more contemporary idea comparison. This kind of idea, this idea of a weaponized meme traveling around the internet, specifically through social media, is very much up that alley. That feels like it would be at home and in any sort of those kind of anthology type shows. This is that kind of vibe in terms of.
I can't think of a better way to say it. And the only other introductory thing that I'll say is, once you've read one of these books, it will set your expectation for the other 2.
Yeah.
Basically, I think both of us, now we're in Memetic, so spoilers for Memetic, have been listed because we're discussing the thing. Once you round the corner and realize there is no saving the world, everyone will die, which caught me off guard.
Yes.
I expected at least an ambiguous ending. Where it's like, maybe it'll be saved, maybe it won't. Psychological horror. Why don't you go chew on that? Instead, it was like, nope. Everyone dies. Chew on that.
And especially with our main character, with Aaron, the fact that, we'll cover some of the things that I don't think work as well, which I think are maybe a product of like being early in Tynan's career in terms of creating story and character. But like Aaron is given not 1 but 2 character traits that make him immune to this meme, right? He's colorblind, so we can't see the picture the way it's supposed to. And he's like partially deaf, so we can't hear the singing or the screaming that the characters talk about,
right? Which
is like the next level of the meme of the weaponization. So he's given 2 immunities. And you're thinking, oh well, clearly this guy is meant to be the hero, I guess, right? Yeah, whether or not it's actually preventing things, saving the world, or at least an ambiguous ending, it's clear he's being set up as the guy. He's the one person that can, right? Because he's the one person that's immune to all aspects of it. Because even as the older retired general, the blind guy, who you think, well, he's immune because he literally can't see the picture, but when it evolves into the being a harmonic thing, he's as susceptible as anybody else. So you're being set up, and then I'm guessing that's clearly intentional, because you don't expect to read a story that has like a downer of like, oh, oops, we lost. You're not expecting that initially, but they've set you up here to have that expectation. Because as we talked about last week, when we think about apocalypse stories, the vast majority of them are either like this, where it's the last stand of humanity in the face of the apocalypse, or it's humanity recovering after the apocalypse, right?
Right.
But either way, it's about the survival of humanity in some aspect, the perseverance of humanity. And here the story is basically about giving up, being like, no, what? I don't want that. You know, it's choosing the collective as opposed to, you know, the individual, the individualism, choosing to be different, to staying out, to basically giving up. Sounds harsh, but that's kind of what it is. Like at the end there, Aaron is basically like, look, I'm tired of being outside.
I
I'm
think it was
tired.
meant to be a beautiful resignation, right?
Yeah, yes, yeah,
Rather than a
yes.
depressed one.
I think so too. Yeah, it's like having an epiphany of like, in a lot of ways, it's in a lot of ways, it's not any different than some of the characters we see. Two in particular, one, Ryan, Aaron's boyfriend, who knows he's seen the picture, he knows he's going to die. When he chooses to jump or to fall off the building, you know, he's like, I don't want to. I seen what happens to people. That's what happens to my family. I don't want that. But I know that's what my end is. Like it's inevitable at this point. I've seen the picture. So him choosing that out, similar to the one female soldier who goes with like the trio of them. They go to Portland to find the maker. Once they confront the maker and realize that there's no stopping this, she makes a similar choice, which says, well, this is the end. Then I'm not going out like that. And she draws her gun on herself. You know, it's the idea of Aaron makes a similar choice there of him choosing to do this. I'm choosing my end in the face of it. There is no choice here for Ryan and for that other soldier. That they have seen the picture, so they know their fate's sealed. If they do nothing, they will become like everybody else. So they are choosing their way out. And Aaron, looking at this, knowing that he can't join this, that isn't his fate. His fate is just to live in whatever this world is after the fact.
Right.
And he is also making an active choice. But you know what? I'm choosing the way I'm going out. I'm going to choose to be a part of this versus staying on the outside, versus what like Ryan does. I'm choosing to end myself, to end it on the outside. He's still making a choice. And I agree. It's not meant to be one of depression or anything like that. It's that there's an acceptance there of yeah.
Well,
like
you have one character that is, you know, addicted to phone social media.
Yeah.
And that character's great apotheosis is to say, okay, you know, I saw the thing and my final act is not going to be to join in the song, not to be folded into the masses, but I'm going to take myself out of the equation.
Yeah.
And then you have the other one who's more naturally withdrawn and has barriers that separate him from the rest of humanity. And his great final act is to say, you know, I'm going to throw my lot in with everybody else.
Yeah.
So I do think each character is on a very different trajectory and get to where they should in terms of their character arc.
Well, and I think the key thing there is that their characters are making choices. You know, you're acting for at least those,
and we can understand
highlighted.
The choices.
Yes, yeah, they're choosing to not be a part of the collective because they know that's what the ultimate end is, no matter what they do. And then you have Aaron, who is choosing, knowing that he can't be part of it. There's nothing he can do to be a part of this other than opting in, other than walking up to the tower of flesh, you know, and joining with that. That's the only way he can be a part of this. He can't get in any other way, because if he stays on the outside, he will always be on the outside. There's nothing he can do to get into it. So, you know, both characters are you know, the ones we highlighted, all those characters are faced with choices of making a choice where they feel the only way they can take any kind of control over their destiny of their life, because ultimately the end of their life is written already. So, you know, I think back to naturally The West Wing, or really The Lion in Winter. I think back to what Toby tells us
as if it matters.
As fair movie is, yes, you know, as it matters how a man falls, when the fall is all that's left, it matters a great deal. The idea of choosing your way out in the face of what you see as one end, that it matters in that moment to make an active choice, you know, to decide to do it yourself and do it your way, versus allowing whatever's going to happen around you. it's kind of it's like one act of defiance, and even Aaron in that sense is his act in joining the collective is an act of defiance, in his own way.
Yeah. So, I mean, we started on Aaron. So let's just do that bit of it first, because there's basically only two plot lines.
There's two stories.
There's Aaron, and then there's like the military group that meets the Bond villain.
Yeah. The government,
the maker,
the government folks are trying to find a solution to trying to find a cure or whatever to the meme. So
we'll do that second. But Aaron, so I have to confess that up until halfway through the final issue, I thought, this Aaron plot line is basically worthless. Like, you could cut this out and it would be the same story, which was true, except he is the one who like gave it some heart at the end. When I think he gets the final page, if not.
Oh, he gets
if
the
not
final
actually,
act, yes.
Yeah, he has the final beat.
Yeah.
And that is kind of when, the government people very reluctantly accept their fate, whereas he kind of joyously merges in with the pile. So we get this character. I mean, not much to say about him on the structure of the book, by the way, 3 issues, 3 days.
3 days, yeah.
And, first day, everyone's seeing the meme, he's not. And at first, I think he doesn't see it because he's not looking at his phone. Like, he's that withdrawn. Well, or no, he clicks on it and nothing happens.
He does, yeah. He sees, he's scrolling. Well, it's called Reddit on the screen, but then the newscaster a page or two later actually calls it Reddit, like in the text. I don't know if that was a mix-up or whatnot, but
that's a disconnect between Eric Donovan and Steve Wands.
Maybe that's something got missed there in the proofing. But he's scrolling Reddit and he sees the picture, but because we're told that he's colorblind, the effect of the meme isn't there, because all of that, as we learn later from the maker, everything in that image is very specific. So it's not just the picture of the sloth and the concentric circles and all that. It's the color scheme. It's everything about it. Everything to take from the whole image as it is what triggers, the reaction, I guess. So because he can't see it, because he is colorblind, he sees it and is like, what's the big deal? Whatever. And then it's a couple hours later when his friend comes in and she's already obsessed about it, and we start seeing it spread virally. But
by the way, did you see who spread it virally on his Facebook page? His friend list?
Yes,
James Tynan, Eric Donovan, Adam Gosowski, Steve Wands.
Yeah, they're all there.
Yeah, and I don't know the other names. I assume they're friends, family, or other people at Boom.
Other people at Boom. Yeah. But no, there is. I want to go back to what you said about how Aaron feels kind of a bit of a nothing in the story, and I actually agree with that, and it's what I was getting at when I said earlier about there's some. I think this is some signs of early comic writing and not being super sure-footed from a couple of newer creators, because like we're told that Aaron is colorblind, but we never see what he sees, and we're told a couple times, like in passing, that he's like partially deaf, but like that doesn't really come up, like, so he has these,
right. You could have depicted these things visually.
Yeah. And I was thinking back and I thought, like, I think what I would have liked is the first time we see the sloth image, which is the first time that he sees it, if we could have seen it like he saw it in black and white or in grayscale.
That would have been smart. Yeah.
And so we experience it as he sees it. And then the next time we see it is when his friend Sarah comes in and she's all freaking out about it. And then we see what she sees, but then we, the audience, are experiencing it the same way it's being delivered, So I think
right.
That would have
helped. And when she
Yeah.
comes in, she had done a knock on the door and then lets herself in anyway.
Yeah.
And he gets startled and she says, I knocked. And he says, I can't hear that. Well, that's a way to convey that.
Well, there is a little bit of that. And he mentions, I didn't have my hearing aid in. There is a lot
I was like,
that.
I did feel like it was exposited a lot where they were telling me.
Oh, so it jumps right in after he falls asleep. It just jumps right in. It says 10:45 a.m. and it just starts with, "I've been calling you for the last hour, you idiot." And he's like, "Oh, what?" Oh, and it's like, "Oh, sorry, my hearing wasn't in." And so you're just supposed to infer from
Right,
that
right.
that
Okay. And so
yeah,
that's a nudge in the direction that you're
it,
talking about.
but I'm with you there. Like, it could have been something of like that top line could have been like 3 or 4 panels of just knocking, knock, 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 knock,
Right.
knock. And then we see maybe it cuts down to Aaron, he's still asleep or whatnot. And that could have been portrayed a little better, at least to reinforce that, because I don't think the hearing loss comes up again until really issue 3, when Aaron goes and talks to the little girl. He hears the little girl on the radio and he thinks he's trying to save her. And of course he finds out that no, the little girl wants to go and join everybody because she hears the beautiful music. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, sorry, I can't hear that. I was born, my ear canal was, a little like partially obstructed when I was born or whatever." And so we just don't get enough of that, I feel, to understand Aaron's character. You just have to accept this is who he is, and that, oh, this is the one guy that's immune, and you got to go with it. But I feel like even though we get those things told to us, I feel like his presentation is a little underbaked as a character.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think once you get the contract to go do the thing, I'm sure that's something that if he sat down and read it, he'd be like, "Oh yeah, I do that differently now."
I would imagine.
But it in no way hinders the story. It's just one of those things where it's like, this would have been the master stroke, right?
It's not additive. Yeah. Well, and the reason I chalk it up to the idea of, the way I read it, as this just feels like the early work of a creator who hasn't, again, kind of found his sea legs yet, is because I've read so many of Tynan's other books, and specifically his creator owned stuff where everything's on him. And like when you pick up Something Is Killing the Children, #1, and you read that, like by the time you get through that, early on, there's a big double splash page that's like, honestly, it might be like 25, 30 panels. It's all the way through. By the time you get to the end of that, like, everything you need to know about the main character, Erica Slaughter. Like, you understand, like, she is fully formed, and everything you see her do, like really the rest of the story and the rest of that arc, you have learned and have been shown and have been told in those first couple of pages of that first issue. Like, she is a fully formed character, even though you don't know any details about her. But who that character is and how she's going to act and how she's going to present to the world, like, you get it right away, So he clearly has gotten better at this. And I think if you were to go back and read this now, I think it would seem, I would think he would have, probably multiple ways in which he would better flesh out and flesh out Aaron as a character and make him a little more complete and help convey that better to the audience. Because he is kind of a nothing. He's the guy, and part of it is because I'm going to say he's the guy in the story, but he's really just the guy in which things are happening around him.
Right. He's not driving the story forward.
Yeah, and obviously that is a direct product of how they set him up, because he's immune to it. He can't see what's going on. He can't see what everyone is seeing, and he can't hear what everyone's hearing. So he can't act with purpose with anyone, because everyone acting with purpose is reacting to the meme. So he is just there and everything's happening around him, which gets to the heart of his final monologue at the end of always feeling like an outsider, So they do set that up well for the character, but as a reading experience, it's not that great. It's not that great in my mind.
Right. Yeah. So to not to get distracted from his plot line, but I think this is one of the oddities of this series, is that if you pick up this trade, you would guess it's probably a 5-issue thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's partially because of the conventions of the industry. Yeah. We're used to a miniseries being 5 issues, 6 issues, 10, 12. For it to be 3 oversized issues, it feels like this whole story could have been, a 50-page one-shot, or like an 80-page giant type thing, or it could have been broken into a few more chapters, just a few more character beats, and it could have been normal 5-6 issue miniseries.
Yes, I think this is where I think I mentioned last week there were some issues. I found some pacing issues especially in Memetic, and I think that comes down to what you just said there. There's the equivalent material of 6 issues, because I think they're double size. I think they're like 40 some pages for all 3 issues. So if you figure your standard issue is 20 some odd issues, you're getting six single issues worth of story. But it feels like it either needed to be tighter or more expansive.
Right.
So
that's exactly.
It had to go one way or the other, right? It had to go either cut all the fat down and get it real narrow, or expand the world out and give us a larger view to really fill out what's going on. It did feel like this one fell a little in a nebulous no man's land. And I do wonder, even if it had been broken down into 6 regular size issues, now that breaks what they try to do here. Each issue is a day. They're doing a thing there. But I wonder how the story would read and how he would make his breaks different if it were, now I'm telling 6 individual stories as opposed to 3. I wonder how he would maybe rework or reorder some of the character beats, because it wouldn't just be like cutting each issue in half and saying this is the chapter break.
Right. No, you'd split the beats, and I think like that decision, especially on Memetic, I feel like probably came down to the editor at Boom. Like whoever accepted the pitch said, because I'm sure Tynion came in and said, look, I got a 3 issue thing. I think an editor would be like, it's a little easier to market a 5 or 6 issue. Why don't we do that? But then you hear the pitch and you're like, I trust these guys. Let's do it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's final decision, but I'm sure that there's obviously an acceptance there. They got the pitch. Maybe they saw the pages, and I'm sure there's a storytelling reason why Tynion and Donovan wanted to do it that way. There's a reason why they wanted to. Maybe clearly again, it goes back to intention. They wanted to tell it this way, and we should say right now it's the same model they follow for the next 2 books as well. They're all presented the exact same way. They're 3 oversized issues. They're all about 40ish pages. So each one of these, you get 6 single issues worth of material, but you get them in 3 oversized issues. And so I'm guessing at that point, once they got to Cognetic and Eugenic, it was like, this is just what we do. Like, this is our format, so we're going to stick to it.
Right.
But I have to imagine there was something in what they felt they were doing here that necessitated 3 oversized issues. Like, we have the story, and that was what they wanted to do, what they planned to do. I can't imagine they fell into it like, oh, we got too much story here. Well, we got to do something. Maybe they, so clearly they had a desire to do that. I don't think when you read it back now, I don't think it totally works for the story. Because especially in that first issue, there are timestamps all over the place, right? 7:30, 7:04 a.m., p.m., whatever it is. And I didn't feel the weight or the need for any of that. Like, I didn't feel any urgency to that. I didn't feel like it added or took away anything to the story. It was just, it's later in the day now. And then, oh, it's day 1. Oh, it's day 2. Oh, it's day 3. And I felt they still could have done that to represent how fast this meme travels around the world and takes it down. Because that's obviously the goal with the story. It happens over 3 days. But there's no reason why those 3 days had to be 3 individual issues. I think it's a matter of, it reads to me like they were trying for something that they didn't quite get to, because I don't think they knew how to do it yet. I don't think they quite knew how to do it. They didn't have the full skill set. The tools weren't as sharp, because again, this is very early in their careers, and especially someone like Tynion, who when you read his stuff, he's like released now is so much tighter, so much better as a writer. And I don't mean to not trying to like slander his early work that we're reading now, but I think most creators would want that, and hopefully aspire to that the worst stuff you do is the first things in your career, right? You're supposed to keep.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, he's absolutely moving the correct direction, and this is by no means bad, because we chose to talk about it because we thought it was really interesting.
Well, I think the themes are there, but I think the specific storytelling choices are a little clunky at times in this book. I don't think they totally work, but I think the themes that he's trying to go for, the big swing he's trying to take early in his career, is very interesting. It's the smaller steps in between to get there that I don't think this quite work, because I just don't think he didn't have the tool, he didn't have the reps yet. He hadn't been through the fires yet. to enable him to maybe tell the story as efficiently and maybe even as effectively as he could do it now.
Right. And I think there is just no substitute for experience,
No,
at the
yeah,
end of the day.
yeah,
You just have to start somewhere,
yeah.
and it's a pretty darn good start.
It is a good start. And I think it is it and I guess kind of what you said before, specifically to Aaron, and I think most of my storytelling concerns kind of hover around Aaron's story and the way that it's paced out. But none of it really detracts from the story. It's just that it's not additive in a way. It doesn't enhance the experience. It just kind of keeps it level in my mind. I'm reading through and I'm seeing some of the seams, but because I'm into the overall narrative, I can hand wave them a little bit, you know. But when we try to stop and drill down on it, some of those specific storytelling choices, I can pick at and probe at a little bit and see that it's not as full as maybe he would get to later. So yeah, it doesn't detract from the story. It doesn't take away. It doesn't make the story unreadable. Put it that way. You know?
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, I think if I had this seedling of an idea, I probably would have done without the Aaron story, just told with like the text bubbles and the Reddit and stuff. Here's what's happening. Here's the government military group. They go to confront this guy, 80-page one shot, 60-page one shot, something where it's like, you just communicate the idea of like, hey, here's a possible way the world could end. Mm-hmm. Whereas the Aaron thing makes me think that I'm expected to settle into the world a little bit because it gets so personal with him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and it's really not a personal story.
Yeah. But it leads up to the end there. But I guess maybe.
Oh, no, he pays it off. Yeah.
Yeah, he does. He does. But you're right.
But it feels meandering basically the whole time.
Yeah. For 75 pages, I'm sorry, for like 110 some odd pages, it's almost like nothing. And then at the very end, his last big moment on the radio is where Aaron gets to shine, and that's where it all pays off. But then you do look back and wonder, okay, that was a great moment. That was an important moment for the overall theme, but was it worth everything we got and the way that we got it previously? Was it worth all the buildup? And yeah, I think you and I maybe both lean to not quite. The payoff is great. His choice is great and it's important to the story, but like all the build up to it, maybe it's not quite as solid as maybe he had intended. Maybe they had intended when they put pen to paper.
Yeah. All that say, there isn't that much to talk about with Aaron for issues 1 and 2. It's just really issue 3.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really beautiful choice where he says, my conditions and the way society is set up have kept me from the outside looking in all this time. And now, even as the apocalypse is here, I'm on the outside looking in. For once, I'm going to enter it and just be a part of the collective human experience, even if that collective human experience is the end and we're just dead now. I thought that was, that's just a great twist. I could not tell you at the beginning of 3 that's how that was going to end. Basically, all of the ending of this caught me off guard. I did have my suspicion raised then when I went to Cognetic, and I had not yet gotten my hands on Eugenic, so I've not read that yet. But I have a suspicion about how the very end of Eugenic will be.
Yeah,
I know what the premise of Eugenic is, and I know the endings. Now all that's left is I have to read the story. But it's part of the Apocalyptic Trilogy.
Yeah. And as we talked about, these are books that they're about the end of the world. So it's not about stopping the end. It's not about what happens after the world ends. It's about how the world ends. And yeah, and they do set it up in that 3rd issue really well, where he's on the phone with the one doctor's Rebecca something, right? That Zhang or whatever. Right. And you can tell that like part of her thinking is like, oh, we found the one guy that's immune to this. Maybe that's the key to saving this. We gotta, work with me, stay on the line, do all,
which
all
was
the things,
pretty cookie cutter, right?
See,
if they
the
take
things
that,
you see in every end of the world movie that always exists, the people who never meet, but they're fighting the same fight. And for Aaron to reveal he's not fighting that fight, literally giving up, not fighting that fight and saying, no,
Just
I'm going
spit
to
it out.
join this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's going to be the end. But yeah, it is a twist there. And when when I first read it, I wasn't expecting that, but you now have your antennas up for the rest of these stories. And now it becomes about the choices people make in the face of the apocalypse, not the Hollywood choices you make of like, we're always going to resist, we're always going to fight back. We're never going to abandon hope. That's what humanity does. What would happen in these situations? What would be the end of humanity if someone like this occurred? And the way it's presented, right? Aaron makes a very human choice there,
Yeah.
the desire,
Oh yeah.
the desire to be a part of the group.
I mean, that's how everyone else there got there.
Yeah.
Like whether it was as deliberate as his or not, it was their base desire to be part of the whole. And ultimately he does prove the villain, the maker, correct.
Yes.
The maker says like, this is what we're wired for. This fractionalized society and individualism. That's not how human beings are wired. And we're pulling against our very nature. Our nature is to be collective and, to be, in his mind, collective to the service of some other alien entity, yada, yada, you can yada yada over the fine details of it.
Yes.
Which, by the way, I think I've twice referred to him as a Bond villain, but the speechifying very much feels like a Bond villain to me. There is. If one of those guys was played by Roger Moore, just listening to this guy, ramble, I'd be like, yeah, I buy it.
I mean, moving into that story there's a very Ozymandias in Watchmen thing of like, I'm going to sit here and speechify everything to you. And the idea of like, oh, wait, if there was like the thing I said I was going to do, I did that 10 minutes ago. Like, I'm only speechifying because you can't stop me. He's speechifying because he knows he's going to kill himself. He's going to die.
Right. Oh yeah. No, it's all done. Like there's already piles of humans. Well, that, and I was like, man, if he expects us to believe, and at this point in the story, I was like, if Tynan expects me to believe that they're going to use something innate to Aaron to undo this, it still feels like you let the problem escalate too big too quickly for me to feel satisfied by like, oh, they're going to use his DNA to fix humanity. It's like more than half of them are dead already.
Yeah.
Like they've melted into human goo. Like it's hard to put that back in the bottle, basically.
Yeah, no, there would have been, I guess that is a point of like, as you're reading it, if you're not expecting the end and if you go in cold, there's no reason to expect how the end goes. There does come a point where you're thinking like, are we too far gone? Like if this gets resolved, is it going to feel earned? Because it really wouldn't have. If that little tactical group that goes out to Oregon to meet the maker, if they found a solution and were able to implement it, like would that have felt earned in the story? And I was thinking about that as I reread it to prepare for this. I was thinking about what that would have felt like, what that version of the story would have been, and the way it's presented, like that would have felt incredibly cheap. I don't know about you, because like it would have been like, here's the last minute reprieve for like the 35 people that are left who just haven't quite made it to one of the towers yet.
Right. It's so bleak. It's barely worth hearing.
Yeah. So it in a way they're setting you up of like, no, and I think that's part of what the maker's speech is kind of hinting at by the time you read it in the story, that we're so far gone. Like there's no coming back from that. Like you came here for a cure to save everybody, but like, what are you trying to save?
Oh yeah. You're out of your mind.
Yeah.
If you think
there's a hopelessness in that point. Exactly. Yeah. But again, that plays into the trope of never abandon hope, right? It's never too late. You can always find a solution. And yeah, I think they're
that plucky
in a way
American attitude.
Yeah. Well, it's a very American attitude because we're the culture that the pop culture that we consume. But yeah, in general, though, the whole idea of, the world rallies against whatever global threat and, the last stand of humanity, all of that tried and true story stuff that they're setting up here, that this little group of rebels they're going to save humanity here by going to the source. And they get there and the guy's like, nah, no, too late. Nothing you can do, and
Yeah.
just, throws up deuces and he's out. And then they look around and they have that moment of like, oh, now we're just dead, right? Like there's nothing we can do. And you have to come to grips with that moment. Like we failed everybody. And maybe we never had a chance to succeed in the first place. Like that's kind of like the last thoughts they have prior to join, at least for the two that go and join the collective, that idea of maybe we were on a fool's errand this whole time. There's nothing we could have done because we've already lost, there was no coming back from this by the time we got out here. We thought we had a chance, but we were never in the game at that.
Yeah. Which, I mean, it reminds me a lot of the final beats of Infinity War, where like you just watch the failure hit every character's face.
Yeah.
And like the fact that was, Marvel story, and you knew there were already more movies slated and announced and shooting and stuff. The fact that they still got an emotional beat out of that, despite everyone knowing logically, like there is no way these characters are gone forever. Whereas in this story, it's done.
It
and
stops,
if you're holding the physical book, you're like, there are not enough pages in my right hand to make this work out nice.
How is this going to resolve? And it doesn't resolve. I mean, it does, I guess. It comes to an end.
It resolves. It's not. It's not doing fan service, I guess.
No, it's not doing what you expect. What would be anticipated based on, frankly, a large chunk of similar media that you probably would have consumed before reading it. It goes in a different direction. It goes in its own way, and I think it's meant to be off-putting. I think they talk about that when you read the letter, that in the back of the trade, if that's the way you're reading it, the way it's presented in like text messages form. But they talk about the idea that, their goal was to set out and end this book on an unsettling manner. I think they even talk about like, how do we think readers are going to feel at the end of the book? Are they going to feel cheated? Are they going to feel cheapened? Is it sad, depressing? Is it uplifting? Whatever it is, that all goes into their intentionality with the story. And I think on that front, they succeeded. And again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier of the overall ideas, the big swing ideas of what they're trying to do with the story and the types of things they're trying to discuss. I think that stuff really, really works. It's just some of the specific storytelling beats that just, I bump up against because I'm used to reading stuff specifically written by Tynan. It's tighter.
Right.
And that comes from the last 5-6 years of reading all of his stuff and seeing how much better of a writer he is. So to read an earlier work and see those kind of not so much missteps and fumbles, but like quasi missteps and fumbles of just like, I feel like he can do this better. So I bump up against that. But the big idea, again, the big concept, that stuff I think really lands, and that stuff really works. And the questions they want to leave the reader contemplating at the end are still there. In that, the book is successful.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's the ultimate metric is, one, did the author, did the creative teams do what they set out to do? Did they stick the landing?
Yeah.
And, I feel like we end up saying it every series, but it's hard to do endings in comics.
Yeah.
And hilariously here, what we have is a situation where we're nitpicking kind of the beginning and the middle, but we both agree they stuck the landing.
Yeah. Because it was so unexpected. Yeah.
Well, you actually did the hard part. And it's the easy parts that we're like, just clean that up, and bam, you got a superstar in your hands.
And I think what's strange too,
I think this guy's going to make it in comics.
Yeah, he's probably got a future. This Tynan guy, he's probably got a future in comics. But as you were saying that, I was thinking, obviously we kind of talk about what our reaction was when we read it the first time, because that like any kind of suspense or horror, any kind of story like that, it's that initial impression. What'd you feel the first time when you didn't know what was going on? We're reflecting a lot on that. But I think going back and rereading it, knowing how it's going to end, honestly, I think some of those kind of looser aspects in the earlier parts of the book, I think they become a little more apparent. because now that you know what the end is, and you know where they want to where they want to leave the reader, I think some of those issues that I bump up against just become even more prominent to me, because I can see I can see the seams behind it even clearer now, because I know, oh well, this part here isn't going to matter. They're not going to come back to this. The time we're spending here isn't going to matter, because ultimately where these characters end up is known at this point. So I'm going back and I'm focusing on the things that I think are going to help direct the story and the reader to that end. And I see a lot more extraneous bits, I guess, as I reread it. And again, I think that's just, they weren't quite ready to tell the story as tightly and efficiently as they kind of would do now. I'm really thinking about one of the books that Tynan has out right now, which is called World Tree, which is probably the closest analog.
I thought of this book. I thought about that book a lot.
So, real quick, World Tree is a book that Tynan has with artist Fernando Blanco. And it is this idea that these group of people, when they were in college in the late 90s, discovered what they called the underweb, the undernet, which is like the hidden part of the internet below like the dark web. And that's like the worst place. And that becomes, you open yourself up to that, and that's where you become corrupted and really comes kind of weaponized in a similar way that we see what the good time sloth does to people. But it's this idea that they found this place and they were to shut it down, and now in current days it's come back, and they're trying to they're trying to prevent this mass spread of the underweb, of the undernet. And it's the similar idea, the similar germ of idea that technology, specifically the internet and our interconnectivity around the world, can be weaponized against us. But the way that World Tree handles, I think, specifically all the characters, because there's a lot more characters you're dealing with. Again, the word efficient just comes up. Like, you understand who they are, where they stand, what they want. You just get a fuller sense of their role in the story and how it's going to play out, versus what you see with Aaron, who just still comes off as just kind of a blank slate. And it's like he found a way to revisit Memetic,
right,
later on, and not fix it, but like tighten it up. Like, let's put a slightly different spin on it now. A 2022, 2023 spin on it. Because, honestly, if you think about when this was written it came out in 2014 there, in the early 2010s, our relationship, specifically to things like social media and all that, were a lot different than they are now. Things have changed even now. So him kind of revisiting those aspects of our relationship to technology and our relationship to the web in something like World Tree, I think it shows the growth of him as a creator, as a storyteller. And I think it'd be interesting whenever, I guess you can read the first arc of World Tree, which is out right now. It's still ongoing, but to read that kind of in a back-to-back scenario, like a double feature scenario with Memetic, going Memetic to World Tree in that order, and kind of seeing that progression. I think it allows me to appreciate, I think, World Tree a little more, but again, also appreciate that Tynan was taking these swings early on. He was he was tackling these big ideas, even if he didn't quite know how to do it, on the exact steps. He was challenging himself to approach, again, horror in a slightly different way, and kind of and daring himself to go out there and trying to do it. And again, I think this story works, but not without a couple trips along the way. And I think that's indicative of an early creator's work.
Yeah, well, and I don't want to spoil a different book, but so I was talking to a comic shop owner about this book in particular, Memetic, as we were getting ready to record it. And he was like, oh, interesting. He's like, it actually sounds a lot like the villain of that sounds a lot like the main character of Nice House on a Lake. And
oh, sure, yeah.
And I was like, oh, yeah. I was like, so
it's
they're
kind of book, yeah.
Well, right. And these are all seeds, right? It's like, but you wouldn't, I would never say he's telling the same story over and again. It's like,
Oh
yes,
no,
he's staying
no,
in
no,
the
no, no,
same
no.
genre. He
Yes,
plays with the same themes.
yes,
And in the same way that, my boy, Jeff Lemire, I think a hater, not that I don't think he has haters, but if there were,
no, he mean every creator does. I mean, so
right. I mean, I think there are people who just don't like him, but I don't think
yeah,
anyone's like, oh,
no,
he's a hack. But uh, I think if someone were criticizing him and trying to be reductive, they'd be like, hey, just tell us the same, mopey watercolored stories again and
yeah,
again. I'm like, right. Yeah, I'm a mopey watercolored kind of guy.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
I'm like, and I can hear that story with little twists, again and again and again and not really
yeah,
get tired
yeah,
of it.
yeah, no, yeah,
And I
yeah,
think, and so to anyone who has any feeling of like fatigue with Tynan, or feels like he's being repetitive, it's like, yeah, it's probably just not your thing.
yeah. No, I
Don't
definitely
force
agree.
it.
Yeah, he's not ripping himself off. And again, the comparison to World Tree really, honestly, it just kind of ends with the idea that technology, specifically the internet and our interconnectivity, is kind of the source of our undoing, or the source of our horrors. That's about where it ends. The approach is entirely different, but it still goes to the idea that the internet is bad, kind of, that the internet will be humanity's undoing, which may not be too far off from the truth. But yeah, outside of that, they're not similar in any other kind of way. um
No, it's
but
kind of
again,
a superficial similarity, but it's one of those
yeah,
things where it's like, it's though that one aspect is so similar and it's the
yeah,
same writer, so
yeah,
you can't
yeah,
not see it.
yeah. But there are hundreds of thousands of directions you can go with that same premise. Weaponized meme, weaponized internet kind of thing. There are endless stories you can go that way. But yeah, because it's the same writer, because he's approaching this material effectively 10 years apart. Yeah, there are similarities, but I think they're good similarities. I think it would be a very interesting read to read these back to back and take a look at them, and how he addresses and approaches similar ideas, at different points in his career. I think that's a maybe a more academic approach, but I think it's interesting, and I do like that he's done that, and I think we'll see that a little more as well when we get to Cognetic and Eugenic. That again, there are like small seeds of ideas, maybe not even the main idea from those books, but there's like a small seed of something there that clearly would have just kind of stuck with him, and kind of puts it on the back burner, and is like, I want to come back to that. Maybe I'll reapproach that from a different angle later on. Those germs of ideas still stick with them, and I think you can see them in some of his more recent work. And yeah, it's not that he's ripping himself off. He's not being repetitive. It's just these are the ideas that excite him, that the ideas that get him creatively going. So yeah, I don't mind it, especially when it's someone as good as Tynan.
Yeah, and I suspect he's not a person who revisits his work. Just based on the quantity he creates.
It'd be hard. Yeah, it's a lot to
yeah.
read.
I mean, well, yeah, and I listened to again, not that there's really any comparison other than they're both writers, but I listened to an interview with Jeff Lemire not that long ago on some podcast, and he basically said he never touches a book again once he sent it off to print.
Yeah,
like, he doesn't read the final copy. He has never gone back to reread Sweet Tooth or anything. And he was like, well, like my experience with it is over. It's the audience's now.
Yeah.
Like it was cathartic to write it and to get it out. And he's like, and I'm not a sad, depressed guy. I get my sadness out in my work and then I can go live my life, but I have to get it out. And, based on the very limited number of interviews I've heard with Tynan, but really reading his letters here, I don't think he's a guy who expects the world to end all the time, despite writing books about it. I think every time he has a paranoid little thought and the news scares him or something in society scares him, he plays with it. He fictionalizes it.
Yes.
He shows.
I would imagine the exact same thing. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So when we book him on the podcast, which is just a matter of time. Just a matter of time.
I think there's something interesting about that, about not revisiting your work, in that when you do, when it appears that you're revisiting ideas, I mostly assume from a creator standpoint, it's not that they're going back and being like, oh, that was a good idea, I want to go back to that. It's that whatever little bit of it they internalized when they were making it stuck with them, and it came out again in a different form, in a different story, in a different angle, because they're at a different point in their life or something like that. So yeah, I don't think it's a matter of actively going back and rereading your old work and trying to mine it for another idea. It's just the parts that stick with you are the parts that clearly you had some connection with. And then that's just going to come out. It's going to manifest in some other form, in some other story that just happens to be tangentially related to something you did before, because while you may have covered whatever story and theme you wanted to in that first time, there's something about it that still maybe felt unresolved to you, whether you as the creator knew it or not,
Right.
It's just kind of a subconscious thing that's stuck back in your brain that, when triggered properly, like I said, reading something horrible in the news or whatever, seeing something out there, an image or whatnot, a conversation with another creator or a friend or whatnot, all of a sudden that little germ pops back out, and now you're working on a new story. But that initial idea, that germ of an idea, came from one that you had done years before, and that's just how the creative process.
Yeah. Okay. We should talk about these other characters who, I mean, you might as well name them like blah blah. It's like, it doesn't really matter. They're not our human contact point.
There's the tech guy, there's the soldier, the couple soldiers, and then there's like the blind retired soldier, know, and then there's the doctor. They are the stereotypical resistance group. They're the ragtag team, last stand of humanity. They're the ones that identified very quickly what was going on, and they're the ones that can save the world.
Right. So Independence Day or whatever.
Independence Day, Pacific Rim, whatever it is, any kind of these things. If this were being told in a standard Hollywood movie, that would be your main core group.
Right.
That would be the narrative focus would be on them and them trying to stop the apocalypse. That's what it would be. That's what their job is. And I mean, they're presented in those ways. Each one of those characters fits a fairly standard archetype for these types of stories. And yeah, as you're reading it, again, not knowing how it's going to end, you get a sense that that's what their mission is. They're going to do this. They're going to find, their story is to find the cure, find the solution, the remedy for all this. And then Aaron's story is the guy on the street. He's the guy living it, So he's our point of view for the audience of, this is what the world is like. And then we have our group of resistance fighters, our rebels, and they're the ones who have a mission to end it. And then those two stories will come together at the end when they save the world or what's left of you. That's the standard way of telling the story that any Hollywood movie, any dozens or hundreds of Hollywood movies have told before. So yeah, they're not given a whole lot of, they're all pretty one note, I guess, right?
Right. Well, and
a lot of character depth,
and it is intentional because it is saying, this is pushing against the current, and like what they're going to do. Like if we got more attached to them, it would just mislead us about the direction of the story.
Good point. Yeah,
in an unhelpful way.
Yes.
Because then this podcast would be like, it's 6 issues. We spent all this time with these guys, and then they all just die in the room. And so
that's true.
It's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't as a writer.
That's right. That's fair criticism of us as well. I think the idea that we would get to the end and feel like, wow, it was a waste of time for those characters, wasn't it? Well, we got that whole issue,
which I almost said about Aaron. I mean, like, I was ready to go off about that character, and then that, again, he stuck the landing.
Yeah,
and so,
but in this case, though, the way we're talking about it, it wouldn't have been sticking the landing. It'd been building those characters up only to just have them fail and die. So that would be, I think, the way
we don't even see what happens. That we just know they're doomed, right? And we just leave them.
Yes,
they literally don't matter.
Yes. Yeah. Well, because that's again, the whole point of like their fate is set. Once they realize that the maker can undo, he's not going to undo anything. Well, they already know that they're running out of time, that they're on the clock of how much time they have left, and they know what their end's going to be because it's the same end as everybody else. So there's no need to go into it and see another person do it, because we've been seeing now for the past 2 issues now. So yeah, they're just there to like learn the inevitable truth that they lost.
Right.
Well,
and we learn this was not done accidentally. This was done intentionally. It's
yes,
not
yeah.
and here's this guy's justification for it, which is like 2 things, right? And I think his justification is a little muddy. Like on one hand, he's kind of saying like aliens told me to do it, and on the other hand, he's saying I have a perfectly rational reason for doing it. Maybe the aliens gave him the rationale, or maybe the aliens gave him the order and he figured out the rationale.
I read it like, the aliens gave him this order and he saw it as an epiphany of like, oh yes, humanity is not about individualism, it's about collective, the collective so I read it that way, that he got an epiphany from a moment of clarity from the aliens, or he calls them angels or whatnot. And he has
the angel wings in his glasses. And by the way, that page where he says the angels, I think this is probably, once Tynion had this monologue written, I think he had the whole book. Like, I think this page alone you could work backwards from and craft an entire story. At the bottom of it, he says, this is what we've been building toward from the very beginning. This is what we've always supposed to become. And we've spent millennia perfecting the art of spreading information. It's our drive. It's all of what we are. It started with language. You see, we had all of these strange little things in our head, and we needed to show them to one another. But words spread slow, and they tend to be forgotten. So we learned to write. And as we wrote, the ideas, they could get more and more complex. They could spread further and faster than ever before. And as soon as we learned how to speak and read others' languages, but it wasn't enough. It took too long to write and too long to rewrite and what we needed to say over and over and over again. So we created print, and we created distribution systems and economic systems and all sorts of good, fun things. But the purpose was always the same. Take an idea and spread it faster. Beam it through the air. Talk through radios. Watch through your televisions. All converging exponentially to this moment right now. So, by the way, he is dressed like Dr. Evil. Like, if he had a cat, he would be Dr. Evil.
I was gonna say Andy Warhol, but okay, yeah.
It's a shot at Andy Warhol.
I mean, he's got
catching
the
strays
hair.
here. I know, and the art on the wall too.
Glasses. Yeah, he clearly has. He lives in a studio.
He's definitely an Andy Warhol fan.
I feel like they're Warhol's a clear inspiration for this character here. So
yeah. So anyway, I feel like that monologue is. Are you familiar with the work of Neil Postman?
I'm not. No.
Okay, he's a media critic and literary scholar. He wrote a couple books in the 80s, I think. And one of this, you probably know the title, "Amusing Ourselves to Death."
I've heard of that.
Yeah, and he talks about the impact that television has on the human brain, and I think he quotes that someone in the Reagan administration, maybe for the Department of Education, someone was talking about like the impact of computer usage and televisions, and this executive in the Reagan administration referred to them as like, I don't see what a talking toaster would have to do with human development. And it was like, woo. That was 100-year-old quote the second it came out of his mouth.
Big yikes.
Yeah. So just though our governing bodies have always been 30 years behind the culture.
Yeah.
But all that to say, he has very similar premises. There was another book a couple years ago called The Shallows, called What the Internet is Doing to Our Brain, where like I read nonfiction authors who speculate on this type of stuff because I find it endlessly fascinating. And he was saying, the guy who wrote The Shallows, he was like saying that, when we invented writing, our memories got worse because societies advanced their histories by telling oral stories, but the art of oral story went away when we developed the ability to write. He's like, it wasn't necessarily good or bad, it just was what it was. And he's like, and now people are losing, rote memorization skills because they don't need it because everything is Googleable.
Mhm.
And he was like, not necessarily good or bad, it just is what's happening to us, and we're losing the capacity for deep thought, like long prolonged sessions of thinking. And he did seem to think that was bad, even though he was like, oh no, I'm just an observer. And but he was framing it as a very bad thing.
Yeah.
And so I think
you write something like that, your impetus to write something like that is to, in a way, criticize it. So you're almost like default position is that like this is a bad thing that's happening. Otherwise you wouldn't be calling it out, right? That's kind of
Oh yeah. And I think you and I are both like, so I think the reason these type of commentaries emerge and the reason why they had the impact they do is because we're moving at an unprecedented speed with technology. You and I'm sorry to say, are old enough to remember when the internet did not matter for presidential elections.
Yeah.
I would say
When
it didn't really swing the 2000 election. It probably
it didn't.
I mean, it was around and existed, and there was
yeah.
garbage like the Drudge Report and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it was like, people were like on it, but people weren't spending all their time on it, and they weren't like sharing with their friends, right? You were reading from official, I'm using air quotes, official sources. And even 2004, it was like a little less so. By 2008, everyone had Facebook, Twitter.
It was 2008, yeah.
And the fact that, we were both out of high school, into college, out of college around that time. Yeah. It's like, I don't feel that old now.
No, but I think it's similar to like, people go back to what was it, the 1960 presidential debate, right? That was on television. Kennedy Nixon.
With the sweating,
right? Yeah. And by having that on television, they talk about the influence that had on an election. And so, we're using U.S. presidential elections as our kind of benchmarks here. But no, definitely the idea that, I mean, just technology in general, like I can remember like the idea that you would research a school paper on the computer was just like asinine. Like, what? Like, well, how would you do that? Like, where would you get your information from? Right. On the internet, you can't do that. Like that was an absurd concept in school, to the point of like it not even being considered, like not even being a possibility to do.
Right.
Like the idea that
our parents told us you can't do that, and now our parents are citing conspiracy theories, and you're like, "Where'd you see that?" And they're like, "Facebook." And I do have to say, my senior year of high school, we were allowed to be Googling things, although we still had to find a print source for the same information. But we were encouraged to research online. And one day, now I was also in computer programming classes in high school, and we had a substitute teacher, and it was an old woman who clearly had never used a computer before. And she was like, okay, here's what the teacher said to do today. I don't know what any of that means, but if you need help, she went to the whiteboard, grabbed her marker, and she wrote www.goggle.com. And we were all like, oh yeah, we got a free day today. Because we all went to goggle.com, obviously.
Yeah, clearly.
And I think he probably typed it correctly, and she was like, Google, that's not a word. Yeah. And she like did a real-time spell check, it was like a T9 error, basically. And if you're old enough to know what a T9 error is, then you're on the right podcast.
Congrats, you found your people. But no, I think it is interesting because in terms of our two ages spanning the current leap in technology that we're seeing, the idea of the proliferation of computing and the internet and what we see now, knowing that our lives have bridged this current generation of what we're seeing now. So we're seeing the furthering of the technologies that we saw the birth of which I think is and can, at least I can remember, prior to them existing on a mass scale. So having seen their entire life cycle from introduction to where we've progressed to now, I think is very interesting, and in some ways kind of frightening when you look back and you realize like all the things that we have now and that we use and rely on that just like didn't exist before, and not just didn't exist, but like I remember existing without it, you know? And now, so now why am I so reliant on it? You know, how quickly that changed of like not thinking I needed this thing to now like the idea of not having it is just doesn't even cross your mind. Like it's an impossibility.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah. When I got my first cell phone, somebody said, "Why would you need a cell phone?"
Yeah,
and it was said just like that, and it was like it was like a coworker at work.
Shouts once again to my older brother, who when he went to college, at least his freshman year, in the mid '90s, as an engineering student, went to school, didn't have his own computer because you know what? Didn't think he needed one, and you know what? I don't think he did at the time. Like, went to college without a computer. Well, I'm not going to age him there, but in the mid 90s, you know.
I thought you were going to say that he gave you a hand-me-down Nokia brick as he went off to college.
No.
You could now pass to his kids because it still works.
My first cell phone wasn't actually a cell phone. It was actually a car phone, installed indie car phone.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. And it was out of the passenger seat, like leg room.
Yes.
Mounted. Yeah.
100%. So no, again, to see this life cycle happen, and it's to the point where we are now with phones and computing, and seeing the internet go from what it initially started as to, you know, the thing it is now, the mass access, and the idea that it is critical now. It's seen as critical all over the world, right? Everywhere in the world, regardless of how advanced a place or society is, the idea that the internet is critical now. It is now like an essential service that has to exist in order just for society to go on. To see that happen in like 30 years is mind-boggling. And yeah, so I can see how someone who has a overactive imagination as a creator can look at something like how a picture, something like a sloth giving the thumbs up, can go around the world so quickly. And I said, if that were weaponized against you, against people, you know,
and this book gets credit for being prescient because I think, yes, all of these thoughts about how quickly technology is moving certainly affect, you know, millennials and older. I think Gen Z may take it all for granted because
they're born into it.
Right, they're born into digital natives. And but anyone older than our age or older, which I think Tynan is 2 years younger than me.
He's a little younger than you, yeah.
But he's a true millennial. Mm-hmm. And you know, that's all whatever. But I think when we hit COVID-19, everyone realized how frail and fragile the world is. It's like, a little airborne virus literally shuts everything down. The globe, the global economy, everything. And now Memetic came out 5 years before COVID-19. So
more than that.
It was October 2014, and I think the first case of 2019, COVID-19 was late fall 2019.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So yeah, in 5 years. Yeah.
I'll give him 5 years, but you know, 6 years before the world shut down.
Yeah.
And when you combine those two ideas of one, technology is moving faster than our feeble government can regulate it, faster than we can understand the impact it is having on us, and how easily something can just bring the gears of society to a grinding halt. I'm amazed that he stopped at 3 on the Apocalyptic series.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh yeah, no, we start kicking those ideas around, we can generate apocalyptic doomsday scenarios all day long.
Yeah.
But I think what he does with the series is kind of puts them into 3 buckets. It's like, here's the social media way that it ends.
Here's a technology way, and we'll see with Cognetic and Eugenic different ways to Yeah, the buckets is good. I'm really liking that. The idea that like these are the only 3 buckets, and they're not the only ways to the
Well, and
world
there are a lot of
can
other
end
stories that could fit
in
into
those
those
buckets.
buckets.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But this is the technology version. Even though there is this, as we see, like the literal, I guess not the last page. The last page is day 4, but we see like an alien invasion apparently comes in, and then the book cuts out. That isn't part of the story. So while there is some like extraterrestrial stuff going on in the background, that's clearly not important. What's important here is the way that information spreads. So it is technology based. Yeah. And in that bucket would also be something like World Tree. It's in that same bucket. All of Black Mirror would be in that kind of bucket. How our use of technology and its influence on society can be used against us. It was funny. I was thinking about, I mentioned this last week in the Zero, how, one of the reasons I picked the book up was because on the cover of the trade is the good time sloth. Like, it's the picture. It's the meme that in the book is used to end the world because you can't stop looking at it. It gets shared so quickly and everyone loves it. I picked this book up because I saw that and was like, I got to know what that is. Like,
Right.
like
and as soon as you flip it open, according to the theory of the book, you're dead.
Yeah, I'm gonna die in 12 hours. But I was thinking, like, how perfect that image is. But then thinking back, like, what in, specifically in our social media era, which, really goes back to when Twitter really takes off in, we'll say, like, what, 2009, 2010, something like that, when like it becomes really, when it moves past beyond just like tweeting what you had for lunch. Right. And it comes out of the idea that it was a micro blog. That's like 2009, 2010, something like that. So in the past, like, however many 12, 13, 14-ish years, like, what have we seen that has caught this kind of fire? And the first thing I thought of was the "what color is this dress" thing.
Yep.
And if
I don't know why, but I was just thinking of the same thing.
Yeah, I in terms of how this was nowhere, and then it was everywhere, literally in an instant, and everyone was talking about it, and everyone saw the image, and thinking, "My God, like, that's the kind of thing that Memetic is talking about." That how quickly something can go viral like that. Just an image, whether it's, an image, a fun image of this sloth here, or the idea of what color is this dress, and how quickly that permeates every level of society, right? That isn't just it wasn't a generational thing, because that went across every platform. It went everywhere.
And everyone saw the white and gold dress.
Yes. And everyone punch you through the screen right now. But the idea of so it grounds a story like this of thinking like, oh, nothing can happen that quickly. Nothing spreads that fast. And it's like, oh no, actually it does. And when you sit down and put a little thought into the kinds of things, the kinds of incredibly stupid, incredibly meaningless, inane things that go around the world at the speed that it does, it would be something exactly like the good time sloth, Like,
yeah, I mean,
that's exactly what it would be.
And cue another West Wing, the Josh Lyman explanation of like, oh, that's not how the world's going to end. It's not going to be a nuclear blast. It's going to be a little vial with a rubber cap that's worn out.
Yeah,
someone accidentally drops it.
It's literally going to be COVID-19. That's what's going to shut the world down.
Yeah, I mean,
it's one person getting sick and not knowing it, and then all of a sudden, a lot of people are sick, and then that shuts everything. I mean, that the situation you described there, that thing from that little monologue by Josh Lyman about smallpox, like, that's effectively what happened with COVID-19. Like, that's how the world ends, or at least shuts it down. Like, that's what happened, and yeah, these things, they're when we get to cognetic and eugenic, again, no major spoilers here, but those are a little more science fiction-y, I think, in terms of their plausibility. Not saying that you can weaponize a meme the way that Memetic shows, but just the idea of what the spread is, the fact that we would spread it willingly because it's what we do with funny pictures.
Right. Oh yeah.
That plausibility is chilling. when you think of what the ramifications that they show in this book is, because you would share that without thinking, because that's just what you do. You saw a funny picture about a sloth, and you're going to share it. You're going to repost it. You're going to tag everybody you know. You're going to text it directly to people you know. So not just throwing it out into the ether. You're going to put it everywhere it is, because that's just what we're conditioned to do. And so, yeah, the idea that the transmission of our demise is just us being stupid on the internet. I mean, what could be more fitting for us?
Right. Yeah. And by the way, the speech I was referencing from Josh Lyman was in either 1999 or 2000, but I'm pretty sure it's 99, because fall 99 was the beginning of the West Wing, and that was like episode 4 or 5.
No, that was it was
Crackpot and These Women, episode 5.
7 or 6. Yeah,
it's 5. I got the
5.
script up right here. Yeah. And he says, smallpox has been gone 50 years. No one has acquired immunity. Flies through the air. You get it. You carry a 10-foot cloud around you. 1 in 3 people die. If 100 people in New York City got it, you have to encircle them with 100 million vaccinated people to contain it. Do you know how many doses of smallpox vaccine exist in the country? 7. If 100 people in New York City get it, there's going to be a global medical emergency that's going to make HIV look like cold and flu season. That's how it's going to be. A little test tube with a rubber cap that's deteriorating. Guy steps out on Times Square station, smashes it on the sidewalk. There's a world war right there. Mm-hmm. Beautiful speech that will keep you up for days and days.
Yes, especially when
especially
you
post-COVID.
A couple of years ago.
20 years before COVID. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, big block of cheese day. So that meant that's multiple different West Wing episode references in this episode.
Well, that's how you know we're really on fire. If Pornsack were here, I think he'd jump in with us.
He give a third one, since I gave one, you gave one. Yeah, Pornsack gave a third one there. So, but
which, by the way, I just saw that the writer's ban is lifted. He's writing the script for The Good Asian.
Yeah,
not related to this book at all. Yeah. But if you have not read it, go read that book. He's a gifted writer. It's a gifted creative team. The entire creative team was on this podcast talking about it, and it's an Eisner winning book. If you like Eisner winners, which you clearly do because you're listening to a James Tynion podcast, you cannot miss The Good Asian by Pornsack.
I'm thinking about that. You mentioned adaptations, and I'm thinking about that. Like, it would be interesting to see these 3 things, because if you were to adapt these 3, they would be all 3 of these stories would just be like Black Mirror episodes. They'd be 1 episode each, right? I mean, that's how you'd condense them down that way. It'd be an interesting take and an interesting entry into some kind of anthology series like that, and some kind of end of the world anthology series. It would make for, I think, an interesting revisit to look back at this now, 10 years on almost, from when Memetic first came out. If someone were trying to adapt it and see what the story would be and what kind of twist they would make, because I think so much of the story is still relevant. So many of those themes are still relevant, because if anything, we're more reliant on the things that Tynan and Donovan are commenting on.
Yeah.
We haven't weaned off it. We're more addicted, if anything. So yeah, something like that Good Time Sloth would be, it wouldn't take 3 days. I don't think. I think it'd take half that time now. If this were weaponized, I think it'd take half that time to reach the same end now, which is, not great marks for us as humans.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, that's basically all I have to say about the book. I wanted to get my shot in there for the maker. I thought he's kind of a one-dimensional villain, but that's actually his purpose, is that he's doing someone else's bidding, and we never actually see, other than the last page, the people pulling the strings, so to speak.
In general, everyone's a one-dimensional character, with really the exception of Aaron, who has no dimensions until the end. And again, if there's a flaw in this story, and I think we covered it, I think the characters they aren't fleshed out. To not use a horrible pun with the end of the book, but they're not really full. They're not really full characters,
Too soon.
But again, they're not meant to be, though, right? Because the whole point is everybody dies. Everybody dies. So, but I think we will see, as a tease going forward, with even starting in Cognetic and into Eugenic, there is a little more work put in because I think he's just better skilled, even though he's still writing about the end of the world. You understand the characters and their motivations and who they are and kind of what their purpose is a little better. And you see that get better as we go through this trilogy. But here in the first one, it's just, I think the characters are the weakest point in terms of their presentations. They're all just there to move the story forward. And that's fine because that's what characters do. But I think you're hyper aware of it in this story because there's nothing else there to glom onto. None of the characters have anything extra that makes you root for or against them. They're really two-dimensional. So it's almost just window dressing to move you to the twist at the end, which again is a great character moment for Aaron that you don't really see coming. There's no build up to it really, other than what he tells you when he tells you all my life I've been an outsider for this and that. We haven't spent any time with that because we've only seen him in the apocalypse,
Right.
And so,
yeah, I mean,
so it's either give us more story with him or give him less story with him. But for what that character was and the function he was going to serve, there wasn't enough there for what we got. I think.
I agree. That being said, the more I've talked about it, the more I do see it's pretty well balanced. I didn't get tired of him. I just kept wondering why I'm following him. Given the scope and scale of the story.
Yeah.
And again,
because it's clear his story is effectively a solo story because everyone he interacts with is with a short time and that person dies. So whether it's his friend Aaron, whether it's his boyfriend Ryan, the doctor and the little girl, everyone he interacts with is a short time and then dies because they're part of the larger collective and he's not. So maybe that's supposed to highlight his isolation, but it's obviously clear that he is one story and he's one character versus our little group of our band of rebels, again, who are also, none of them are really 3D, but at least there's more of them, they serve different functions each.
Well, and they
Aaron,
almost
by himself
in the band of characters almost comes off as 3D because they're such caricatures that we can fill in the blanks of like, oh yeah, that's a military guy. That's
because there's a group of them. They're like collectively, they're like a full character, and even when they meet the maker at the end, they're all because there's more characters interacting with each other versus Aaron just by himself. So yeah, there's a question as you're reading of like why we keep going back to this, or not so much why, but you're waiting for the moment when he becomes important because it's going to happen, and then that moment is of his rising to the level of being important is him deciding to just die, enjoy everyone else at the end of the that's his big character moment. But yeah, which is I think quasi earned, but maybe not as well earned as it could have been if, like I said, if Tynan wrote this story now versus 10 years.
Yeah. But, again, I think these are relative nits in the grand scheme of our, like we've covered stories on this podcast that I really enjoyed, but the ending was kind of like, meh. I mean, you ended it, but, and at least you got to end it, which not every book gets to do. So again, I can't say how much I appreciate someone that writes from the ending forward,
Sure.
And is pulling us toward this inevitable conclusion and then, just delivers it beautifully. So
I agree. But I think knowing that there's probably a tighter way to tell the story, knowing that they were going to know how it ends, they could probably tighten it up some. And again, I think I agree that they're nits because the overall story works, the big swing works, and I keep talking about the big idea works. It's just those specific steps along the way, for me, are kind of meandering. So it doesn't take anything. Doesn't take anything major away from the story for me. But when I go back and reread it and I revisit it, it's not because of the characters. It's not because of the specifics. It's because I want to sit with the ideas that it, and only the ideas. Like I'm not going back to reread for the characters or anything like that at all. It's only for the big ideas to sit and contemplate with those a little more.
Yeah. And by the way, We haven't said enough about it. I love Eric Donovan's art.
That is true. Actually, no, I do have a note about that. I do love his character arc, his art. It reminds me a lot of Jorge Corona, who has done a lot more work. He's done a lot of DC work recently. He's done a couple books with Scotty Young. If you read, want to pick up Middle West or The Me
Oh
You
yeah.
Love in the Dark,
Yep.
he has a very similar character style, I think, especially in the way they draw his faces. It's a little angular, it's a little exaggerated. But I'm a big fan of the character work. It's very expressive faces, and I do really like the way he draws. And said the Jorge Corona is who it reminded me of, and Corona is someone who, when he's on a book, I get very excited because it's different than some of the, a little, I don't know, a little cleaner, a little more stylized stuff, especially
Right.
when Corona draws for. I'm going to say the big two, but he's mostly drawn for DC. When you see his art on a book that's just a little different than some of the standard house style, which the big two have gotten away from a little more, but it's always nice to see his style and his work, his character design, and Eric Donovan's work reminds me a lot of that. So I think it for me specifically, I think it's the way he draws faces and expressions. I really love that. I really connect with.
Yeah, and he did a variant for The Me You Love in the Dark, hilariously.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm not surprised. So.
Yeah, not shocking stuff, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those things where it makes sense, kind of a piece. Yeah, I thought, for a moment, for a book that had very few like character moments, character centric beats, it was really important that they land. And
that is true. Yeah,
when you get so few like moments of horror, zoom in on a face, something like that, they really need to work every time, and they did.
Especially at the end there, especially when you get to the end and you get the giant flesh columns and you're seeing that, and you're seeing the mix of joy and ecstasy and pain and anger and all of that together. I do think it ends well, specifically in those moments you're talking about, that there are not a lot of chances to swing, and they make contact on those, because it's pretty fallow leading up to that in the first couple issues there. Not a lot of chances and not a lot of need for it, the way they set the story up.
Yeah. And the suicide scene at the end of second issue, you have the boyfriend, not Aaron's boyfriend, Ryan.
Yeah.
Ryan is hearing this music that to him is beautiful, and yet he's saying goodbye to, the person he loves, and he's jumping off the building, and you have to convey that he's hearing the most beautiful thing he's ever heard, while so deeply sad he's ready to take his own life. At the same time, on his face, because the words are pretty sparse there, and then the best page of the entire story is the full page at the end of issue 2, where it's him falling, and you just see all the billboards and screens in the city with
and they're all on the sloth.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And I mean, and a lot of that is the coloring as well. Coloring is done beautifully there, but just the way that's penciled and inked is just stunning. And
I'd agree that is a great moment. That's a great scene too.
If I got to see Eric Donovan, I would hope that one would be a print. I would also settle for a large Good Time Sloth print.
I would love a Good Time Sloth print. That is absolutely something I want to have in my house, because
I mean, the variant
on some level I'm a sicko,
for the first issue I think a version variant of just the Good Time Sloth.
Which then is what's used for the main cover of the trade. But no, I would love a beautiful print like that, because that's the kind of like comic sicko stuff that I would have in my house. It really is the perfect kind of image, because again, that's the exact kind of thing that someone would post to Reddit, and in a couple hours, every single person would have posted and retweeted on whatever social media platform they're on. 15 people in the first 2 hours that would have changed their profile pic to that. There's a sad hilarity to the fact that you can look at this and just know exactly how it would, regardless if it's weaponized or not. Just that image is the kind of thing that would spark, that would fly around the net. It would fly around social media, and just knowing that and being able to predict that and not being shocked at all that something as silly and inane as that would work in that way is again, it's just kind of like hilarious sad,
Yeah, I mean, but also just like we function in memes now. I mean,
yes, which
one
again,
and
not
they're
great, but it's true.
No, but there are like TikTok is all about audio memes. People will take the audio from like the big thing now is like people taking scenes from a show, like a still shot or a live video, and they'll just stamp a different context on it.
Yep.
And our brain does the rest of the work with the meme. One of my favorites that I have heard from you and have borrowed heavily is the I'm in this picture and I don't like it.
Yes. Yeah.
Which that is a meme. Like, we can split hairs about like, well, it's not the visual thing. It's like, no, that's a meme. We're being memetic in our experience of something else and importing it to something else. That is the base definition of a meme. And so just thinking like the way it spreads, I don't think we can unparse all of the memes that, we are just swimming in.
Oh, at this point, absolutely not.
No, we're just so tangled in it.
Yeah.
That.
So again, it goes back to the plausibility of if you could find a way to weaponize it, like the maker does in this book, like that's it. Game's over. Like it doesn't matter. If you find a way to do that and turn that against us,
I really wish I had the aliens quote like ready to go. Like, that's it, man. Game over.
Game over. I mean, it is. They're because we are just conditioned, because you said it's inextricable to the way that we exist and interact online, which is, you can take that commentary, good or bad, all you want, but it's the truth of the matter. So seeing how the good time sloth proliferates throughout Memetic, it's just how it would work its way in the real world, in our world, what we would do. And so it's the idea that we would be the not the makers of our own doing, but we would the means of it, the distribution of it. We would bring about our own doing, our own undoing, because we can't help but share a silly picture of a sloth. Like that's what this book boils down to. That at some base level, yes, there's the psychology of the inner-bedded thing of you feel this euphoric thing seeing the picture because that's how it's triggering you. But like again, even without that, we would still just share it because it's a funny picture. Like that's just where we are.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I have to say about this. We get to talk about the end of the world 2 more times.
2 more times. Cannot wait. Bring it on.
Gonna be great stuff.
Yeah. Happy fun times.
Yeah. But this is it. We don't get to bash internet culture anymore for a little while.
Yeah.
I'm sure
we're going in a different direction for
it may catch a stray in the future, but this is the this is the end of Memetic. So anyway, if you listen to this episode and enjoyed it, please retweet the episode art with the happy meme. Happy sloth meme. The good time sloth.
Good time sloth. Yeah.
It's the Buddy Christ of Memetic.
It really is. It really is.
Anyway, thank you for listening. Please like and share with a friend, and get Cognetic. Get ready to read that one next week. Give us a 5-star rating on whatever platform you're listening to. And it doesn't hurt anyone to give us a retweet, blue sky, whatever the
repost. I'm not going to say what the term is. Yeah, it's repost.
Well, put it in your Instagram story. If you regret it, it's gone in 24 hours. No one needs to know. It's not stuck on your feed permanently. But anyway, we do appreciate all the shout outs, all the love we get. And just this week, we gave away some merch from previous episodes on Whatnot. Now, we don't use Whatnot as sellers, but there's a comic shop in town that does. Every single Tuesday, they have a great comic show called, it's the Paper Street Trading Company. Look them up. They're in Cincinnati, Ohio, technically Norwood, Ohio. And we may be giving away more there in the future. He starts every episode with 5, or every show every week with 5 giveaways. No purchase required. And if we get more signed stuff or anything for shows that we're getting ready to do, we'll gladly share some stuff there. So follow Jimmy and Paper Street on Whatnot. Follow us everywhere else, and we will see you next week.
Peace.